Yesterday, the FBI alleged it had foiled an Iranian terror plot, but the main suspect has been in custody since September. So why did the Department of Justice wait until now to announce this threat? Is it mere coincidence, as it comes at a time when House Republicans, as you've just heard, subpoenaed the head of the Justice Department, Attorney General Holder himself, for his marred gun-running program, Operation Fast and Furious, which, as you know, let military-grade weaponry get in the hands of Mexican drug gangs? Or is there another explanation for this curious announcement that Mr. Holder made yesterday? Joining us by phone from Virginia is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. Colonel Schaefer, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you for having me, Judge. Sorry I can't be there.
As are we, but we appreciate you picking up the phone and calling us. What is your take on this alleged terror plot involving Iran? Is this the way the Iran intelligence agencies usually operate, engaging with somebody they thought were involved with Mexican drug gangs to assassinate a Saudi Arabian ambassador in a public restaurant in New York or Washington?
Well, it's a long way to get to a much easier target in other places, and no, I don't think so. And obviously, I've interrogated the Iranians. It's two chapters of my book, Operation Dark Heart, are dedicated to this. And that's what makes me think twice about this. The American that they're accusing here, Judge, was, true enough, he has a dual passport, Iranian-American, but frankly, my experience has been directly that these people love being here. Once they're here, they love being here. And the idea of this guy, all of a sudden, after years being a successful, by all accounts, a successful used car salesman in Texas, part of the community, I would think it would be very difficult to imagine him just all of a sudden deciding that he's going to go against everything he's done for the past, for the past 15 years to do this. It does not spell correctly at this point in time.
All right. Well, give me, if you would, your best estimate as to what does spell correctly. For example, is it possible that this Iranian American is a double agent who wanted to trick the government of the United States of America into taking some action against Iran? Is it likely that the FBI concocted this whole thing, and because it was a sting, nobody was ever in danger? There was never a real plot. This guy was plotting with FBI agents who he thought were Mexican drug lords. What does Colonel Schaefer think really went down here?
I think that's part of it. I think the reason it came out now is literally this is red meat to a bunch of lions. I think this is why they threw it out now at this point, not in September. Secondly, yeah, the FBI's had a record lately, and I did talk to one of my inside guys today, and he is saying that he thinks the same thing. You know why? Because he can't find any real information, and he's got a clearance. So that tells him that there's something going on that's extraordinary by the fact that he's an inside, investigator, knows what's going on, and yet, and I'm going to quote here, there's nothing on this within the DOJ beyond what they've talked about publicly, which means to him there's something very wrong with it.
Look, the United States used failed and flawed intelligence to attack Iraq in 1991 and in 2003. Is there the danger that we might use something as preposterous as this plot, which was created and run and controlled by the FBI that was announced yesterday, as a basis for invading the country of Iran, which, as you know, a lot of neocons in this country have been itching to get us to do?
Right. I got to tell you, I do believe the Iranians do pose a threat. However, I agree with you on this. There's no reason to believe at this point that the intel is there to justify a direct military action. So what we need to do here is look much deeper at this beyond what's been put out there. Frankly, Judge, they've got to come clean on this. They've got to actually announce the details of the investigation. And frankly, I think the real issue is it goes back to the southwest border. I mean, if these guys were going in and out, the Iranians were moving in and out of the border, southwest border, we need to look at that again, not only from the perspective of Fast and Furious, but what else is actually going on.
Precisely. Colonel Schaefer, it's a pleasure. These are unpleasant things we talk about.
They are.
But we commend you for weighing in on them. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
It's a rage against the machine.
Iran has categorically rejected U.S. claims of involvement in a plot to kill the Saudi ambassador to Washington. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Ramin Mehmanparas said such ludicrous accusations are based on the hostile U.S.-Israeli stances against Iran. He also condemned all terrorist acts and added that the goal of such fabricated scenarios is to sow divisions and help Israel out of its current isolation. The accusation by Washington comes at a time when reports say the U.S. is launching a media war against Iran. Tehran says Washington is seeking to divert attention from protests in America as it has failed to respond to its own people's demands. The U.S. is also the main supporter of Saudi Arabia, one of the most repressive and undemocratic regimes in the world. Well, joining us on the line from Washington to discuss this further is Hillary Mann Leverett. She's a former White House and State Department official. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV. Now, I'd like to get your opinion, if I may, on these latest accusations against Iran.
I think the accusations are very, very serious. They point to a very bad situation now between the United States and Iran, and one that we should all be very concerned about.
Right. So what is behind this scenario, and why has it been raised now? What do you make of the timing of all this?
I think the timing is very peculiar. Why such allegations would be raised now? I've done an initial read through the complaint that the Justice Department has put out, and it looks like a very thin complaint in my read. It looks like they have somebody talking to their cousin in Tehran. There are not very many real concrete connections that we can see. I hope and would expect of the United States government that these allegations would, the information that they have would be brought in a court of law, would be examined, and would be cross-examined thoroughly, because they are very serious. And it's important to keep in mind that these serious allegations are being made in light of two prior incidents that we've had where allegations, very serious allegations, were put forward that did not amount to anything, or in fact amounted to some very false charges being made. One was, of course, we all know, the false manufactured documents that the United States found in Niger, in Africa, implicating Saddam Hussein's Iraq in a program for making of nuclear weapons. Those were false manufactured documents, but the United States believed them, bought into them, and then went to war in Iraq. And of course, there's another one that involved Iran, and that was back in January of 2002, when there was a shipment of 50 tons of weapons on a ship called Karine A that the United States charged was sent by the government of Iran to the Gaza Strip. And because of that charge, Iran was put into then George Bush's axis of evil speech, which destroyed U.S.-Iranian relations for several years. So we should be very careful and cautious about these allegations, take them very, very seriously, but really demand to see a thorough investigation of what's behind them.
Right, so as a former White House and State Department official, what are your major concerns after reading this complaint, coupled with the U.S. track record, as you've just outlined?
My concerns are, first and foremost, whether there is truth here, whether there is any basis for making these allegations, and why they are being done now. And even if there is a case, even if there is a basis for making these allegations, that they be conducted, pursued in a court of law in an appropriate legal manner, which unfortunately the past couple years under President Obama has been somewhat wanting here. So those are my major concerns. And then beyond that, I am very concerned that charges, that allegations that have not been fully proved could be used to condition the American public to support more coercive action by the United States in the Middle East, which we've seen happen with Iraq and with very serious consequences. So what I do here in the United States now as a professor and as a public intellectual is I try to caution my students, my colleagues, to look at everything that is brought before them with a very cautious eye and to ask as many questions as possible. Not because the United States government is bad, not because the United States government wants to harm people, but because in an environment where the situation is so tense and where conflict really could be so soon upon us, that we do our utmost to make sure that any charges, any claims of terrorist activity are investigated clearly and transparently and according to the rule of law.
And how do you interpret these latest developments in the context of Obama's promises to take a different approach with regards to Iran?
Unfortunately, President Obama's promises, his rhetoric, his outreach to Iran, I think, was short-lived, and I'm not sure how genuine we could say that it was throughout the past couple years of his presidency. He did some important steps to change the rhetoric. I think his initial message, his initial Nowruz message, was evidence of his desire to at least change some of the rhetoric. But as soon as it became difficult, as soon as it became hard, as soon as he would have to put a strategy, a policy to implement a real change in behavior by the United States towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, he was not willing or able to do so. I don't know whether it is simply because it was too hard to do or whether he thought other foreign policy interests of the United States were more important to him at the time. But for whatever reason, President Obama, I think this is just the latest iteration of indications that that President Obama is not willing to really pursue a policy of engagement that would be of interest to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yeah, basically what's happening is that Defense Secretary Leon Panetta visited Tel Aviv back on October 3rd. And it appears as if the Israelis basically told him, look, we've got a 2-month window for this strike on Iran. We've got to get it done before winter, because if we wait, then it's going to make it a whole lot more difficult. And the debate apparently has been on how the United States would give the green light for this Israeli assault on Iran. So lo and behold, less than 2 weeks later, we have this ridiculous fantasy hoax of a terror plot, which it now turns out the so-called mastermind behind it, this used car salesman, turns out to be a drunk, pothead, hooker-frequenting, quote, joke. That's how he's being described. But now this fake plot is being aggressively exploited from everyone from, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, to John McCain. And it's interesting because back in February last year, we wrote that it would be an assassination attempt that would be used as the pretext to go into Iran. Now, we speculated that it might be Obama as the target. It actually turns out that Obama is now being pressured by the neocons. He's being blackmailed into this attack because they're saying this is the only way to get tough, to save your presidency, is to greenlight this attack on Iran. So, 10 days after Panetta visits Tel Aviv, the Israelis basically tell him, look, this is what's going to happen. You better get on board with it. And then 10 days later, we have this ridiculous fake terror plot, which is Anthony Schaefer, Lieutenant Colonel, told Andrew Napolitano last night on Fox Business, is a complete myth. There's no evidence to detail it within the FBI channels. Schaefer had an FBI insider, an FBI investigator, look to see if he could find any details regarding this alleged plot, and he found absolutely nothing. It's being completely manufactured out of whole cloth, and now it's being used as the pretext to greenlight this pre-planned Israeli assault on Iran.
But Paul, importantly on this, and an outstanding analysis you've offered us already, and I know more coming from you today with new stories to be posted on Infowars.com, but the question is the mainstream media going to continue to buy it, and will the people of America buy into this, even though it is now an obvious hoax? I mean, we've got some media outlets are questioning it, others are buying into it. Where do you see this playing out across the mainstream media and then in the minds of the American people? Now, were you able to hear me there, Paul?
Yeah, it's just cutting out a bit, but yeah, I got the gist of what you were saying. Yeah, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and others have come out with articles admitting that most foreign observers and terror experts doubt the credence of this plot. But then in the rest of the article, they'll go on to detail the frivolous, storyboard, the myth behind it. What they're saying now is that there's a chain of plots that are going to be blamed on Iran, so this is only going to escalate. And now Time magazine has come out and basically said, look, the response to this is not going to be sanctions, it's not going to be isolation of Iran, it's a pretext for war. So they're going beyond saying that it's just going to be another tactic to isolate Iran, and saying that Obama's going to have to get tough, or he's going to be accused of being, quote, soft.